Hi there. Welcome back to Prices at the Pumps on SaltWire, our weekly look at all things energy related. I'm Scott Squires, pleased to be joined by the energy expert himself, Dan McTagg. Dan, a couple things to talk about and can't wait to get to that. But first things first, prices adjusted in Atlantic Canada coming up the next couple of days, Thursday in Newfoundland and Labrador, the rest of the Atlantic region on Friday. When we go to the pumps the next couple of days and take that gas out of the pump, put it in the car, what are we going to be paying roughly? We going up, we going down?
We're going down, and the market in general is going down. So that's all good news for consumers. If you can hold off until Thursday for Newfoundland, net drop of about 3.5 cents a liter. And of course, for diesel, about 3 cents a liter. And it's not going to stop there. The rest of Atlantic Canada come Friday will see a very similar decrease unless some of the utilities boards have decided to become a little bit more creative in terms of how they account, but the market shows a pretty significant drop, as we've seen for the past few weeks. Markets are in panic mode, they're nervous, and that's great news for consumers because the continuation of an overhang of inflation created by the Biden administration's massive spending under something called the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot to do with why inflationary pressures have the world spooked. That demand at some point in the not too distant future is about to walk off the cliff.
So again, good news for consumers, as it does appear that prices at the pumps will be dropping the next couple of days. I'm okay with that. A couple things to talk about here, Dan. You and I, for a few weeks now, were referencing the OPEC meeting that was coming up. It happened a couple of days ago. It was going to be in person, then they switched it to virtual, then they switched it back to in person. But some big news coming out of that OPEC meeting. Break it down for us and tell us what it means to the consumer, Dan.
Well, OPEC's going to continue production cuts, but not taper off until the end of the year or possibly into the new year. But that has markets signaling that that's going to be, suddenly a flood of oil is going to make its way back into the markets. The reality is a little closer to the fact that OPEC is, like everyone else, saying if the United States and European nations and others are going to fight inflation by continuing to stimulate economies, which is kind of contradictory, then we're not going to add to the problem, but we're not going to continue down this road of maintaining the belief that we can hold on to $100 oil as a goal. It's pretty clear that there are going to be not just cheaters within OPEC itself, but also around the world. Look, the Biden administration went to the Maduro regime in Venezuela and said, please, oh, please, after we killed the Keystone XL pipeline, we need heavy oil and we need a lot more of it. So about a year ago, they removed the sanctions on production of Venezuela's oil on the condition that the regime, the communist socialist regime of Maduro would somehow bring about free and fair elections, which didn't happen. So that really flooded the market. Venezuela took advantage of that. Of course, the Biden administration was embarrassed by its foolishness and has now had to shut that down. In advance of that, we see this pretty big bulge in oil supplies. And that's, of course, something that I think OPEC has finally decided maybe it's just not worth it. Now, what we don't have from OPEC is a desire to, flood the market with oil, as we saw in 2014, and cause the collapsing of energy markets. But if you look at inventory levels, they're much lower right now globally than they were a year ago or 5 years ago. So regardless of what OPEC does, it comes down now still to nervous markets looking at inflation, looking at government policies, looking at potential demand destruction, none of which has happened. And they're taking the indication that OPEC may be tapering at least some of its members as a suggestion that the floodgates are now opened. I think we're in for a big, big shock, and that's going to leave the world significantly shorter. Now, of course, that the sanctions have been reimposed on Venezuela, hard to figure out where there's going to be that extra oil coming from, especially when the tapering doesn't represent enough to meet global demand.
So if I'm a consumer, Dan, and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, the United States has reimposed sanctions on Venezuela, a big oil producer. OPEC has basically, at least for now, seems to be walking away from their quest for $100 a barrel oil. And, that could mean oil could be cheaper per barrel. But again, wading through all of this, Dan, as a consumer, I'm wondering, hey, when I take my road trip in July or August, or even just driving back and forth to work, in the next few months, am I still going to see this downward trend? Put or look into your crystal ball, Dan, as best you can. And where do you think now, with all of what's going on the last few days, sanctions back on Venezuela, OPEC kind of seeming to ease their push for $100 a barrel oil, all of that, where do you see prices kind of going for oil or gas at the pumps? But also, I know it's only June, but home heating oil, what's your crystal ball prognostication, Dan?
Well, back at this time last year, the prices were pretty much where they are now. This is the surprise in all this. Oil was trading at about $67 a barrel, not 73. That's for WTI. We know that around this time last year, we were getting oil for Brent for about 76 bucks a barrel. We're going to see this kind of move around. For now, it looks like the month of June is going to see a pretty substantial decrease in the gas price. So, we've already seen several weeks of decreases that have brought about at least a 10 to 12 cent discount for everybody. And you think back around the second, third week of April, when we switched from winter to summer gasoline, prices spiked, 10, 15 cents a liter. Not only have those prices come back to where they were, as if we are still in the winter season with the cheaper blends of gasoline, we got another 5 cents knocked off to that. And on top of that, another 4 cents when you consider the federal government imposed an increase in the carbon taxes of April 1st. So, this is really boom time. This is really a sign that consumers can take advantage of much lower prices. And even today's announcement by the Bank of Canada to drop interest rates will only have the effect of, perhaps minimizing or weakening the Canadian dollar. I see it's already lost about a half a cent in value today. Not something I would have expected that quickly, but it could mean, while all these are, indications of why prices go higher, a really nervous, I would say hysterically nervous market accounts for why we may be saving as much as 25 cents a liter by comparison to what fundamentals would otherwise dictate for the month of June. July, I would expect that some refineries in the United States are going to run into trouble. The reimposition of sanctions on Venezuela. And of course, we have that little thing called hurricane season, which last week we were treated to this idea that it's going to be a year unlike anything we've seen before, and warm weather in the Atlantic. Warm temperatures of the ocean means that this is going to be a frightful summer. Well, if it is, I can tell you gas prices will have to reflect that one way or another. In the meantime, take advantage of this, because these are prices that we normally wouldn't see, especially given the supply being somewhat constrained on the oil side and demand still very robust, regardless of any metric that you use. The only thing holding us back is just panic and fear among energy traders, and that's a good thing for consumers.
Dan, I don't even know if I want to go down this road, but I'm going to, because, I'm a consumer. I drive an internal combustion engine car. I put gas in it. So prices are coming down. That's a good thing. You talked about some of the savings over the last few weeks, and it'll probably continue into June. Again, great news for consumers. But I sit here and I wonder, and I know that it's a reality, that the carbon taxes are a reality, and that where the Canadian dollar is a reality. But Dan, tell me, and I know it might hurt me a little bit to know that we can't go there, but tell me, if there were no carbon taxes, no clean fuel standard added on, and if the Canadian dollar was close to being on par with the US dollar, what might a liter of gasoline cost me? Right now, it's around $1.70 here in Nova Scotia for regular unleaded, but what kind of would it be without all that added in stuff?
Look, if we had a country that favored its oil and gas sector, and I think of Newfoundland here, there's more oil than all of Norway. Newfoundland has an $18 billion debt among 800,000 people. Norway, $2.2 trillion surplus in the sovereign fund. If you look at it very carefully and consider the numbers that you have with respects to, how much we've done to damage and to prevent oil pipeline and regulations on oil and gas, which the world wants 8 leaders to come to this country asking for it, you would save 28 cents a liter. You have a carbon tax of 17.61 plus another additional second carbon tax, clean fuel standard of 6. So that's 23 times 15. That's 28 plus 28. That's 50. to 55 cents a liter savings. So the $1.70 that you're paying today, or $1.75 you're going to be paying beginning tomorrow, would be $1.25. And now, if people don't think 50 cents a liter is a big deal, God bless you, because it doesn't matter whether you drive or you drive an electric vehicle or take public transit. The cost of energy drives the cost of everything else. And if you don't think that's a reality, look at your interest rates. They're reflecting inflation, which is being driven by a lack of, as it says up here in top of my head, a lack of energy affordability by deliberate government policies that are designed to cripple because we want to do right by the environment. The reality is it's not the kind of environmental policies, I think, that are going to help the environment, certainly as far as real pollution is concerned. And they're certainly not going to help consumers at a time in which the standard of living in Canada continues to drop. By any metric, our living standards have gone from the 9th in the world in 2015 now to about 30, 35, and we're sinking. So continue with these fantasies, but most of us can't afford it.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about 50 cents a liter. It may not sound like a lot, but I'm going to do some quick math here. And I didn't like math in school. I know it's important, but I didn't like it. But I'm going to try anyway. So 50 cents a liter, 10 liters, that's $5, right? If you fill up your vehicle and it's 50 liters, 5 times 5 is 25. $25 of fill up for a 50-liter fill up if we were paying 50 cents less. I know if I go to the grocery store, the way I look at it, the way my math works is, $25 that I saved at the gas pump, that's a 2-liter of milk, some bread, some butter, maybe some bacon. I don't know. Anyway, I digress. 50 cents a liter, gosh, that would be marvelous. But we're still happy that it's going down, right?
2 Canadian pipelines being built would drop the price of oil an additional $10 a barrel. That's a savings of another 10, 11 cents a liter. Strong Canadian dollar, remove the carbon taxes, all green taxes, all net zero taxes. You're probably looking at 60 cents, but assuming it's 50, that's $1,000 savings for an average family a year. $1,000 in your pocket, not to go make grifters wealthy, as we're seeing in Ottawa. Incredible, the amount of money that's being thrown away, by organizations and folks who've got their hands out, getting all sorts of grants at the expense of the Canadian economy. So I think, put in perspective, Canadians use about 40 liters a week. 40 liters saving $20 on a tank full times 52. That's $1,000. I can tell you, if I were to run on that platform alone, I'd win the next election in a landslide, especially in Newfoundland, where, of course, if they had control over their resources and they weren't being blocked, they could sell all the oil they want, outdo Norway, and maybe in 10, 15 years, wind up with a couple $1 trillion in their jeans. I think that would probably allow me to win that province as well.
So before we wrap up here, I'm a Newfoundlander originally. I was born in St. John's, and I remember growing up hearing about the Come By Chance refinery and Newfoundland's offshore wealth and having the oil platforms offshore and talking about Newfoundland into the next millennium being an oil producing province, a rich province. Can you just repeat that statistic or that data about how Newfoundland's oil reserves compare to Norway? Because as a Newfoundlander, I'm thinking, what are we doing in our province, my home province, why are we avoiding that? Can you again touch on the comparison between Newfoundland and Norway?
Yeah, so the UK and Norway share the North Sea, once one of the richest areas for oil in the Atlantic, but now, of course, displaced by reserves. Provable reserves have been found in and around Newfoundland. If Newfoundland had the ability to do what Norway does and to take full advantage of revenues from oil and did not have a government that was so insistent on regulating and preventing and discouraging investments, Newfoundland could very well find itself in the same position as Norway financially. In other words, do all the things that it's doing, wind up with $2.2 trillion Canadian in reserves, as opposed to an $18 billion debt. Now, I'm not from Newfoundland, but my instinct, in the same way it was correct in 1998 when I demanded of my Liberal government that they remove the restrictive covenant on Come By Chance, helped that refinery hire 800-900 people for a period of 20, 30 years. Now, of course, it's biodiesel today, but Canadians are Canadians. And for Newfoundland to be in that condition, that position financially, when they're surrounded by an abundance of energy that the world desperately wants, especially from Canada, is an absolute disgrace. And any government that plans to run in the next elections or elections in the future should be subject to some pretty damn tough questions from the people of Newfoundland. Why are we 18 billion in the hole and Norway's 2.2 trillion and we have more oil than they do? That's a simple way of looking at it. If I were in Newfoundland, I'd be steaming mad because I think the quality of life, standard of living Newfoundlanders could be elevated substantially higher if the Canadian government could get its head out of the sand.
All right, Dan, I'm going to ask you one more on this. I'm going to pretend now that I'm across the aisle from you in the House of Parliament, and you've just made that statement, and I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member from Pickering just talked about Newfoundland and Norway. You can't make that comparison. Norway is a sovereign nation. Newfoundland is a province within the Confederation of Canada, so you can't compare the two. If I stood up across the aisle and said that to you, Dan, what would your reply to me be?
Well, the Atlantic Accord allows the provinces to take full advantage of the resources they have. That doesn't mean they're going to separate from Canada. Quite to the contrary. But I would come back to the member and say, you want your $5 billion to build hydrogen and all sorts of windmills and all sorts of other wonderful renewables? Pay for them by money you'll get from oil and gas, which is in substantial supply in Newfoundland. Newfoundland deserves to have the same quality of life, standard of living, and financial prowess as Norway does.
I hope you noticed there, Dan, I followed parliamentary protocol by not directly asking you the question, and I went through the speaker.
Yeah, well, as long as the speaker doesn't go out and do any more fundraising for his own party, then we should be good.
Right, a whole topic for a whole other day. Listen, Dan, we appreciate you being with us as always. But when you're not talking with us here on Prices at the Pumps at SaltWire, where can folks find you, connect with you, and get more information from you?
Yeah, information, affordableenergy.ca. Connect with me or gaswizard.ca, or look at me on Twitter from time to time, although not always on topic, but important that people have an opportunity to send an email. president@affordableenergy.ca is the easiest way. Better yet, if you want to get where I'm coming from, come right here to SaltWire, because this is where I say it all.
We appreciate it as always, Dan. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend ahead, and we'll look forward to reconvening next Wednesday and doing this all over again.
Looking forward to that, Scott. Thanks for having me again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Dan.
You bet.